There we go. And so before we start, I'm going to say a couple of things. So, oh, 1 second. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Jeffrey. I'm the facilitator for this session. So I'd like to remind everyone to stay muted throughout the session if possible. There will be a time for questions that will come at the end. I'd encourage everyone else to keep their cameras on if they're comfortable doing so. And to remind everyone to include their institutions in their names. Also, there will be a prize draw at the very end of the session for those who are staying, and for whoever wins, I'll be contacting you privately. And you have a choice between 2 gift cards for $15. I think it's Amazon and something else like Skip the Dishes or Uber Eats. And so I'm joined today by Carolyn Canfield, who will be giving the presentation called Choosing Leadership in Unfamiliar Times. And Caroline is a faculty member of UBC, big faculty of medicine, and she's a patient advocate who has done a great amount of work in patient advocacy. And it's definitely not her first time giving a presentation. And I welcome Caroline to take the center stage now. And thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Jeffrey, and thanks very much for all the planning and work you've done on the committee and with me to get the talk lined up. So I'm really excited. The theme for this first set of talks, the concurrent sessions, is expectations. And this talk is about leadership in the midst of uncertainty, as I know you have high expectations for yourselves. As it turns out, I'm going to build on a lot of what Kedarmate had to say in the opening keynote, and I hope that most of you had a chance to listen to it. If you didn't, do go back and listen to the recording. And I think, Taylor, you can let everybody know how that's going to work, but there will be an opportunity to listen to recordings. So you who are here are already well on your way to a lifetime of leadership. I know that. And I just want to pause to consider all that you've done in the last 15 months to notice, to adapt, to adjust, and to cope. And still you're here with energy and with optimism. You're here to learn and to collaborate and to contribute your insights and build your own networks and futures. Congratulations. Congratulations on being a part of the IHI Open School chapters, and welcome to today's and tomorrow's amazing sessions. So we've set up a Slido, and I think most of you know how to use it. I'm not going to explain it if you don't, but you'll see it on the slide, slido.com, and then our number 677-025. I'd like you to share with others here today the names of people who inspire leadership traits in you. And you can contribute anonymously, no problem. This is a small example of practicing generosity with people around you. And I think that's a core leadership skill. Everyone can learn from you, not only who you name, but also the fact that you're willing to share. So think of someone who inspires you and ask yourself why. What are the qualities that you admire? And just reflect on that. Do you see any of those traits in yourself? Are there gaps that you're working on, perhaps? And as you read other people's names, and Jeffrey's going to look after how to share that with us a little later on in the session, think about what you can learn from others and maybe follow some of those leaders. So while you're sharing about your inspirational person, sharing their name, let me go back to this idea of COVID as the great disruptor. It seems that pretty well everything has changed, has been transformed, or has been disturbed by COVID, not only in healthcare and in education, where many of you are, but in food systems, in the music industry, consumer spending, politics, the film industry. Think of pollution and recycling has been disrupted. Museums, holiday travel, the arts, communications devices and other technology, broadband networks. My goodness, the fortunes that have been made and lost in the last 15 months are amazing. Pet ownership has taken off, sports, firefighting, public transportation, real estate. We've really redefined, again, who's considered an essential worker and why. So this massive disruption was sudden, and it remains unpredictable. We can't tell how long today's upheaval will remain. We can't even describe the changes themselves with much precision. So much is going on. These disruptions are now echoing through our social, economic, and technical worlds, and will continue to do so for many years to come, certainly through your educational years and your early career years, and probably the rest of my life and the rest of your life. So I've lived through a disruptive time before, over 50 years ago, and that set me on a very different path in my life. So I'd like to tell a little bit of that story. I was 17 years old. I was growing up in the United States, and I'm sorry about the American influence, but I made a decision to come to Canada shortly thereafter. But this is the story of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1967, and his sermon that was entitled "Remaining Awake During a Revolution." Let me set the scene. It was the summer of love, 1967. 100,000 young people converged on Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco for what was called free love then, and psychedelics. As Timothy Leary advised, turn on, tune in, drop out. In 1967, there were 500,000, 500,000 American troops stationed in Vietnam. In Washington, D.C., there were huge anti-war protests. Also in 1967, the anti-war movement got a big boost when the civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., announced his opposition to the war, as it was draining valuable domestic government funding, and a disproportionate number of the casualties were African Americans. So the summer of 1967 was also a long, hot summer, with 159 as what were called race riots across the US as the culmination of institutionalized unemployment, abuse of policing, and poor housing. Gee, does that sound familiar? So that's 55 years ago, nearly 55 years ago, 54 years ago. Remarkably, in 1967, Thurgood Marshall became the first Black person appointed to the US Supreme Court. But then it would be another 14 years before the first woman of any color was appointed in 1981. In 1967, the modern feminist movement was barely starting, and it wasn't on my radar as a 17-year-old. I was just starting my university education in Grinnell, Iowa, in the middle of the US. On October 29th, 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. arrived on campus for a convocation and to receive an honorary degree. The next day, he would be traveling to Birmingham, Alabama to serve his 19th jail sentence for civil disobedience. 6 months later, Dr. King would be assassinated in April of 1968. His sermon was entitled "Remaining Awake During a Revolution." What he was saying was, pay attention to what's happening around you. And that's not an easy task when the world seems so chaotic and troubled. He said, whatever, quote, "whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality," unquote. And you can certainly see that theme echoing around our discussions of complexity science today. So Dr. King said things would not improve on their own because time is a neutral force. He said, remaining awake means recognizing injustice as an active force that must be intentionally opposed. King warned against complacency, which he called, quote, "the convenient denial of being part of a society in which injustice endures and perhaps even prevails." He continued, "Who are you in relation to this? Can you really be silent?" So this changed my life. At 17, I sat in the front row of the bleachers in the Derby gym. I heard him, I shook his hand afterwards, and I was awestruck by the power of his delivery. He continues to inspire my conviction today so that I can act on my beliefs to make a difference in the world. I can act, and it matters. So also attending Dr. King's speech that day was a 37-year-old Omaha, Nebraska businessman. His name was Warren Buffett. He later said, quote, "I remember that speech that Martin Luther King gave. That was one of the most inspiring speeches I've ever heard. Took me right out of my seat." Well, Warren Buffett recalled Dr. King quoting an anti-slavery poem from the 19th century that said, and Warren Buffett said, quote, In that speech, Dr. King talked and said, truth forever, he quoted the poem, truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne, but that scaffold sways the future. Well, he was going to be dead in 6 months, but that scaffold did sway the future, Buffett continued. With that great voice of his, he just rumbled that out and then went on and used that as a theme. So Buffett said at the time, on reflection, civil rights changed my views. After King's speech at Grinnell, Buffett felt, quote, a sense of urgency to do something more for civil rights too. Somehow, that day, Dr. King made Warren Buffett want to join him as a committed and active force to counter injustice. Perhaps this is the beginning and the end of my similarities with Warren Buffett. So he and I both were motivated to make an impact and send a ripple into the world. Buffett went on to accumulate enormous wealth. Today, he's the 7th wealthiest person in the world. He's now 91 years old and worth over $100 billion US dollars. And he's also committed to send a ripple by actually spending 99% of his wealth to help people directly, not through endowment funds of established charities and institutions, but directly. He's challenged all wealthy people to act similarly, to give away half of their wealth. He undoubtedly is and will be the greatest philanthropist of all time. So what I've attempted in my life, especially in the last 35 years, is to make an impact and send a ripple into the world with my time and energy. When chaos erupted in my small community, that sent me into action 35 years ago. And then the terrible upheaval in my personal life, the unnecessary death of my husband in healthcare, had me turn to look behind the curtain of how the healthcare system works and try to make a contribution. So I believe disruption creates opportunities. And sometimes we can see more clearly when things are blown apart. So where does that put you now? What we know is that we will not be going back to pre-COVID times. We're much likely to be in VUCA times. It's a useful acronym from the 1990s when the end of the Cold War created, well, VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous times. And that seems to fit COVID pretty well. So we can't fix chaos, but we can control how we respond. And here's the kind of reflex VUCA strategies from the literature. 1, accept that there is a new normal, constant change. 2, choose to engage change with energy and optimism. Change powers change. 3, lead yourself and others with purpose and structure. 4, apply values to define a path to sustain yourself and your collaborators. And finally, be alert, reflect, and revise often. Remain awake to notice the revolutions that are going on around you, as Dr. King advised. Revolutions are opportunities for change. So if we consider revolutions that are underway now and have been given a huge boost by COVID disruption, these are all your environment for the future. This is full of opportunity for your commitment and your action. So as Dr. Mate said, virtual health, remote consultation, and technology with their implications for every aspect of care. How about molecular medicine research, immunology, genomics? They've been turned upside down. Public health management, coordination with all the other services and help in emergency, military, voluntary sectors. We know we need to gather and connect very complex information and make meaning of it. And Dr. Mate mentioned some of that. Health data informatics is a hugely expanding area, and we all need to know more about it, even if we're not in the middle of it. Artificial intelligence, as Dr. Mate mentioned, there's patient-generated data, epidemiology, big data, and artificial intelligence that he spoke about. How about population modeling? Healthcare systems have to learn how to document themselves in new ways and are, but they have to talk to each other. Primary, acute, long-term care. There's geographic and census data and demographics that have to be folded into this massive amount of health system data and personal health data. Opinion surveys and health literacy have played a huge part in pandemic countermeasures. Consider how the fragmentation of healthcare divides the patient into body parts rather than seeing the whole person, which is really required for true health and healing. We all know that. And I could go on and on. So even within the healthcare sector, the explosion of COVID has disrupted almost every aspect. One of the great revolutions that's underway is the democratization of healthcare. It's a disruption that carries opportunities just like the others. And Dr. Mate spoke about his view from IHI on patient activation. So the public, active patients and communities are getting more involved in every aspect of healthcare, in co-creating healthcare with healthcare professionals and systems, in co-designing care delivery, in partnering in the evaluation of care, and in research about every aspect of care, from those molecular science right up to behavioral. In training healthcare professionals, you'll find patients in the classroom, patients as partners in learning formats. In bringing knowledge to the public, patients and communities are essential, and we've seen that through COVID. How much of the vaccine program has ridden on the back of networks and structures that are already parts of communities in society outside of the conventional healthcare system. So as you build your networks, consider the value of collaborating with patients and community partners. At every stage, ask yourself, how could a patient, a client, a service user, a family caregiver, well, bridge the gaps across medical practice, healthcare systems, and social determinants? They'll help you see the intersections and the complex relationships that are essential to understanding what's actually going on. And maybe more importantly, they embody trust as the core unifying value in healthcare. Think about how this forces clarity about the purpose and outcomes in your work. Think of assets like plain language summaries, new funding sources, for example, SPORE, the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research from the Canadian Institute for Health Research. Great communication skills are part of what patient partnership carries. Tireless commitment and outcomes that matter to patients self-evidently. So partnering actually bakes in relevance and practicality and often urgency into your work. So in every quality improvement project or patient safety campaign you might get involved with, or you might consider starting yourself, ask yourself at the very beginning, would patients or user partners help me see the whole picture? I mean, think about it. What is quality if you don't talk to patients about the outcomes they seek? And what's safe care if you don't learn from family caregivers what they fear most? So there's a burgeoning literature on patient partnership. There are many practical tools for connecting up, and there are plenty of experienced patient partners across Canada too. Every aspect of the massive COVID disruption reveals a fertile landscape for you to enter more easily. It's full of innovative spirit and the courage to fail often, to learn and to develop as a leader. So now I'm going to offer some specific advice. And I do so knowing full well that you may ignore it, but I'd like you to consider it. My advice for choosing a direction to go in is to head for unfamiliar ground. Go where you don't know much, so you bring fresh eyes and your vigorous curiosity. You'll work using your weak ties. In social network analysis, there's a theory about weak ties, that those are the people that you don't know so well as your strong ties, who are your colleagues, the people who are more similar to you. So relating and strengthening your weak ties and turning to your weak ties challenges your creativity and growth, and it contributes new perspectives. Having to explain yourself carefully, to think things through, can be exhilarating. If you were only around closer colleagues, you might feel already well-defined and complacent about learning or growing. So give yourself the gift of a little disruption. With disruption comes opportunity. So go towards what you fear or don't know much about, or find intriguing but mysterious. The results and the rewards can be immense. So I know each of you have come to this talk prepared and motivated and ready to make an impact and send a ripple into the world. I hope you found some useful support and ideas in what I've had to say, and there's lots more to come in the conference. Finally, I'd offer to you my motto for any time you feel yourself wavering or doubtful. You know how it turns out if you do nothing. And I've used this throughout my activism. In other words, nothing's going to happen if you don't give change a try. So have the courage to just open up the possibility for change, the possibility that you will ignite a spark in others and lead that change. Make a difference. Go for it. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. I have one other set of kind of specific ways of showing leadership, and I can turn to that if we have enough time, but I don't want to get in the way with sharing what you have posted on the Slido and absolutely responding to your questions. So thanks very much for your attention. And Jeffrey, do you want to let me know what's on the Slido?
Yep, I can share screen for the Slido. Give me one moment. So let me see how I need to cancel your screen to do it. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So here we go. So here are some leaders that were written down. So we have Greta Thunberg, President Obama, Warren Buffett, Stephen Hawking, my grandmother.
I love that.
Malala. Me too. Greta Thunberg again, and then Michelle Obama, Steve Nash.
Right.
You.
Oh, stop.
This is our.
Olusegun, I know him. Yeah. Segun.
Yeah, our anatomy professor at UBC.
I've worked with him in the Faculty of Medicine with my hat on in the admissions work.
Oh wow, it's amazing. My brother, and then Bang Chan, leader of a band.
That's great.
Okay, interesting.
And I love it that this spans from celebrities to sports heroes to instructors and to our families. Leadership is I wouldn't say ephemeral, but it's everywhere. If you look, it's everywhere. Some of the skills that exemplify leadership that you can see in other people, but you can cultivate in yourself, that I've noticed, and I've looked around in the literature to see what kind of frameworks there are for exemplary leadership. And there's a 5-element one that I quite like. And it was published back in the 1980s. It's called the Leadership Challenge. Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner developed this. And they're still around, and this is still being used a lot of places, and you may have heard some of it. So the first leadership practice is model the way, set a personal example of what's expected. And some ways you can do this is following through on promises and commitments. You can see this in some of the names that people have volunteered on Slido. Make certain that people adhere to their agreed upon principles and standards. So have the courage to speak up. And Kedar talked about that as well, of calling out and being honest to principles and values yourself and in other people. Being clear about your philosophy of leadership so that you share that. Modeling the way also builds consensus around the values of your own organization. If you model this way of leadership, others will see that and will reflect it back. And also have the humility to ask for feedback on how your actions affect other people personally, but also their work performance, and learn what your impact is. So having humility as well as courage is a really powerful combination. The second leadership practice that Kouzes and Posner suggest is inspire a shared vision, and that's cultivating a really compelling collective direction. So talk about future trends that influence your work, share this with other people, and learn about their view of the future. This paints a big picture for group aspirations, and it helps describe a really compelling image to form direction around. It shows others how their interests can be realized as well. So it builds that collective effort. Speak with conviction about the meaning of your work in terms of this shared vision. And this appeals to other people who would like to share their vision of their future. The third practice is challenging process. And this is, if you'll excuse my language, being a shit disturber, but in a positive and creative way. So where there's disruption, it's easier actually to look for alternative ways of doing things. Seek those challenging opportunities to test your skills in new areas, as I spoke about, of seeking the unfamiliar. It enables you to identify milestones that keep projects moving forward. When you challenge the process, you challenge the convention. And people respond really well to new ideas and actively searching for innovative ways to improve what we do. You know that already through PDSA cycles. Challenge people to try out things that are new. It's fail often. You've heard this saying, and it really is about the willingness to take risks. Obviously, you investigate every aspect that you can and try to anticipate what the consequences are. But ask yourself, what can we learn if we go this way? Being curious and being humble about what we learn and being generous about sharing it. The fourth leadership practice is enabling others to act. So that's about respecting and encouraging cooperation across differences, recognizing diversity, celebrating it, treating others with dignity and respect. Now, obviously, this helps you in the skills for developing cooperative relationships. Active listening is core. It's active listening to diverse points of view, not just those that mirror your own. And you will grow, but the skill of active listening is incredibly powerful to the people who are speaking. It gives them confidence. You also want to award people choice in how they do their work. So tolerating that diversity in your own work is really important. You will learn by watching the way other people set about the challenges in their lives. And this also involves people in decisions that directly impact their job performance. So ensure by enabling others to act, you ensure that people grow in their tasks. And even within your IHI Open School chapter, I know that you've had this experience. And the final leadership, exemplary leadership practice is one that's, I think it's rarer, and I think it's because in our culture, we're shy about our inner life. But what the Kouzes and Posner say, the words that they use, the language they use is encourage the heart, build confidence in others and confidence in yourself by offering generous praise for others. Say it out loud. You probably think it, you know, when you're around someone who demonstrates amazing skills or amazing leadership. It's hard for us. Canadians are notoriously shy to say it out loud, but start practicing that. Get personally involved with recognizing people around you and celebrating accomplishments that are individual as well as group. Praising people for a job well done, even little tasks, it makes you feel good as well as the other person. It reinforces great performance. Make sure that people are creatively recognized for contributions that they make to success. Recognize people for their commitment to shared values, to that celebration of diversity. And I think we need to frequently tell stories of encouragement about the good work of others. So when you've had a great project, tell other people about it and what you learned from it. The celebration of success always carries learning examples and adaptation in the way through the journey. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions, if anyone's got anything they'd like to take me to task or to expand on. Thanks.
There are some in the chat. Give me 1 second to close the screen share. Okay. All right, so the first question we have for you is, with regards to weak ties in medicine and healthcare, this seems to encourage diversity with who you surround yourself with and your interactions. Currently, to me, our healthcare system seems quite siloed in our training and in practice. How can we work to change this and encourage outer views?
Thank you, Taylor. I think that healthcare is notoriously siloed, and talking with any patient or reflecting on your own patient experiences, you know how difficult it is to tie specialist practice and experiences in with your general practitioner, and information doesn't flow well across those gaps and silos. Patients are very well aware of the silos, but as you say, from a student standpoint, from a professional standpoint, the silos are daunting as well. Now, both of our universities, U of T and UBC, are working hard on improving interprofessional learning. And I think that each of us can seek that out. I can certainly speak, well, I've talked to people at U of T about this as well. Bringing patients into the classroom is a fabulous way to bridge gaps. And there are a multitude of strategies, not always very well known across campus, not always very well known within a department. But if you seek them out, finding those opportunities to learn with patients are great. There are also many interprofessional programs. At UBC, I've observed that many of the other health disciplines have embraced interprofessional learning much more so than the Faculty of Medicine. I think that's traditional. And, you know, I'm enough of a disruptor that I'm not going to spoil my career by saying so. But it reflects, it continues to reflect in professional life. And I think that that's tragic. To me, when I think about the reality of healthcare, it has to be a collaboration. It has to be a collaboration across the silos. And the work that I've done in talking to health professionals about finding value in their career, finding the rewards of hard professional work, hard technical work, hard emotional work. It really is through connecting with your patient and continuity about the longitudinal experience of patients. And it is connecting with your peers and sharing your experiences. That's where the emotional rewards are. There's a lot of talk about personal sustainability and being agile and adaptive. And too often, I think it lands on the individual having to take punches, having to somehow absorb stress. I think there are so many practices instead about connecting outside of your own bubble, connecting with others, to see that it's shared experiences and to see that you can learn from others constantly through your career. And again, through weak ties, through forming relationships with the pathologists, with the community pharmacists, with the community cultural groups that many of your patients are part of, to reaching out beyond your narrow silo of training and comfort, to understand the world that your patient experiences, and actually the professional world that you need to understand in order to address that improvement drive that we have kind of hardwired into us through IHI, through the lessons of open school training in quality improvement and patient safety. It's integrative. And the more that we can model integrative brain space and self-concept, we see ourselves in a network, not a lightning rod for disaster, but we're connected with others. That can give a real, that can be a game changer for career reward. And the sooner we do it, the better. I do know, though, that it can feel daunting in university programs and in professional qualification exams that look very narrowly and very deeply and probably miss some of the most important skills development, but there's lots that you can do. And I think connecting through the Open School chapter is a beautiful way to form the networks that will sustain you through your careers.
That's a great answer. I totally agree with that. We have another question coming through, and that's, as a patient advocate, do you think that we have adequately included the patient's voice in all of the changes that were made in response to COVID?
Oh, no, of course not. And the new organization, Health Excellence Canada, EC, is made up of the Canadian Foundation for Healthcare Improvement and the Canadian Patient Safety Institute. They're now under a new organizational umbrella. They've done a lot of work on what happened 15 months ago to family caregivers, especially for people in long-term care, people who are in congregate living situations with the isolation. And it really, I think that the lack of a presence of the family caregiver, of the neighbor, of the close friend, the person who visits every day or visits once a week. This was missed. This was, the focus was on the reaction to a lot of unknowns about a contagious, deadly virus. And what wasn't seen was the deadly effects of abandonment, emotional abandonment, but practical abandonment too. There are so many ways in which family caregivers ensure good care for people in congregate living, elderly people often, or people with chronic conditions. And there are a multitude of tragedies. The tragedies are sometimes physical, medical catastrophes, and sometimes they are emotional and cognitive collapses. And the damage done to the human experience through dying alone of COVID, of grieving alone after deaths within the isolation environment, whether it was related directly to COVID or some other cause of death. Grieving alone has been torture. The lack of an ability for families to celebrate has mental health costs. You think about the impact on young children in schools closing, that these are human experience failures. And I guess in part because of the mental model we have of public health, that public health traditionally has been about public health programs to limit the spread of contagious disease, to ensure vaccination programs, to ensure perinatal support for infants and mothers. And, health is beyond the medical definition. Public health includes a great deal more. So, we learn by our experiences. We learn by the tragedies we live through. And when I talked about disruption opening opportunities and being awake for a revolution, Dr. King's advice, there is a revolution in the understanding of community and family life through connection. And we have taken this for granted. Of course, it's been disrupted and violated over the last decades, but COVID shone a very bright light. It's like the bright light that COVID has shone on inequity. Think about inequity through COVID. If we had a different governance model for healthcare, there are some inequities and some tragedies through inequity that would not have happened. And I hope that our learning health systems, our health systems that aspire to be learning health systems, can really take up some of these lessons. It's, I hope, a path to recovery from the brutal experience that continues on for healthcare professionals now. I know every province has a different experience at the moment, but nobody's having an easy time of it, if for nothing else, the marathon burden it's been on people who work in clinical practice. So I hope that a way of recovering from that, that the burden of that slog through an overwhelmed healthcare system includes the opportunity to improve the care experiences, the life, the living of in all the facets that make us human, that make us fulfilled. I hope that healthcare professionals can be swept up into that cultural rebirth that I think, I mean, I'm a born optimist, I guess, but I do think that that we can do this. And I think of the pent-up enthusiasm in the arts community. There are so many creative people that just can't wait and are probing all the kinds of new electronic ways we have of connecting, that can't wait to reconnect with creativity and the audiences that participate in that. And I think it's that kind of bubbling up of creativity and imagination and connection that this COVID trauma may set in motion in a really positive way. I hope so. I see there's a question here about active listening, tips for active listening. I was just reading an article in a peer-reviewed journal in the UK written by a hero of mine named John Launer, Launer. And it's about a method that he has used in training clinicians to what he calls to practice conversations inviting change, CIC. And it includes a form of practicing active listening. And it could be turned into a kind of parlor game. And I know he doesn't intend that. But the setup is this: you work in pairs, and it's in 20-minute intervals. And the challenge is for one person to consider a real dilemma, and it has to be real. It can't be a fictional one. You can leave the names of people out of it or put it in, but a dilemma on how to deal with a real problem, a real quandary. And the other person, the person without the quandary, asks questions, creates a conversation, and they are not permitted to offer advice. And it's an exercise in curiosity. So the idea is you start the time, and for 20 minutes, the person who's asking the questions asks questions that do not give advice, that instead explore the contours of the dilemma. And the idea is that this is a learned skill, and there's a lot more to it than the parlor game I'm describing. But the idea is that it develops your imagination and your curiosity and your understanding of human nature to ask these kinds of questions, to be challenged to ask these kind of questions in deep humility. It's not about you, it's about the person you're supporting. And I know I am very guilty of thinking through my response when I should be active listening and really in the moment, completely absorbed with the person who's speaking to me. It's a hard habit for many of us to break. And I think this practice is great. And then after 20 minutes, you switch roles. And of course, the dilemma, the quandary certainly doesn't have to be about anything medical. It could be, any aspect of our lives. But I think that's a really interesting challenge. I've been asking a few people in my circle, would you be willing to do it? And people have backed off. So if someone would like to do it with me, I've got my email on the slide. Be happy to take up the challenge on Zoom or phone call. Any other questions? Any other thoughts anyone would like to share about this idea? I mean, it seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? That disruption and chaos and catastrophe would be an opportunity. But I do think when structures are shaken up, when order is dissolving, if we pay attention, we can see trends that are otherwise invisible, or we can see ways to connect up ideas that just didn't seem so obvious before. I think priorities also tend to, if we have a strong connection to our values, I think those value-driven priorities become really enormous and very motivating. I think most of the people who are in our meeting are of an age where the experiences that you have in these months and years will set you for life. And I think that's why I'm encouraging that that courage to go to places you don't know anything, where you're not comfortable. What's the worst that can happen? It's boring. I mean, really. You don't know until you're there. And I think one of the obvious potentials goes back to Taylor's question, which is bridging silos. If you go to a place that you don't know anything about, you're going to draw a lot of connections. You're going to bring with you a lot of connections, and that will contribute no matter where you end up in your working life and your personal life. Having those experiences will enable you to better understand complexity. More able to navigate the complexity of relationships and topics and research questions. I guess one of the other, I am starting to feel like an old lady. So I'm over 71 and working on my 72nd year. And one of the things that I know, and I obviously exemplify it, is enthusiasm is contagious. And through my life, when I had career choices to make or choices about what to study or what direction to go for serious stuff, how to make a living or what career to pursue, it seemed rather trivial at the time, but I think it's really profound. I went where there was enthusiasm. I would follow the magnetic teacher or the topic that just seemed to be bubbling with new ideas or ideas that were certainly new to me. For me, enthusiasm breeds enthusiasm. It's the most contagious and attractive trait in people, and in my world, in my way of thinking, and energizing. It's so satisfying. And I think the IHI Open School structure invites that. It invites you to invest your own enthusiasm and have it reflected back tenfold. Well, I see we're just coming up to the end of our time. I'd like to congratulate the organizers. I might not have a chance to do it later. Taylor and Jeffrey, you've been brilliant. And Catherine, I guess you've been part of the organizing too. Thank you very much for helping me with this session. And I'm looking forward to the other sessions for the rest of today and tomorrow. It's just brilliant. And I hope everyone who's a participant will take back into their learning and school and practice environments, work environments, the sense that the sense of optimism, I guess, that is just foundational for me. That disruption is an opportunity, and that the expectations we have of ourselves will sustain us and will provide the rewards that we seek.
Yeah, thanks for coming and doing this talk. It's for some of us, especially the IHI side at UBC. It's definitely not the first time we've heard you speak, but of course, every time we appreciate it, we get so much to learn, so many new ideas to go through. And so to all of you in the chat, to all you participants, so I said at the beginning that we're going to do a prize draw, and I have come out with a winner. So the winner is, for this session, the person named Jen. Jen, if you can check your chat for details on how to arrange everything, and then could you message me back? And as well, I did have another question come through actually. So one question I had is, what advice do you have for someone who struggles with or public speaking? And especially if the school environment doesn't adequately provide them opportunities to work on such skills?
I think starting small, starting one-on-one, you know, leadership, people talk about leadership as being compelling large crowds, and that may be fine for extroverts, but it's not fine for introverts. I think establishing your oral communication skills one-on-one, and IHI, again, the open school chapters can really facilitate this. When I was a child, I was impossibly self-conscious. I could not stand up in front of my class without my knees shaking and covered in sweat and stammering. It was impossible. And it was the experience of being in a different group. You know, as I matured, as I got out of high school and got into university, I could reinvent myself. And I did think about what were the traits of people I admired. And I tried to emulate that. I think having the conviction of a message that you want to deliver, that you have a personal investment in, can be a real asset. And that mantra that I shared earlier of, you know how it comes out if you do nothing. So you know what happens if you don't speak your truth, that, you know, it will remain within you. And if you want to share your truth, if you want to share your enthusiasm, you will begin to do that in conversations, folding that into the way you relate with people that you intersect with, those weak ties, not the people that you're super comfortable with, but the people on the outside who are just at the edge of your circle. I think accepting challenges, again, going to where it's uncomfortable, and having, you know, write up a script, have the experience of presenting the script and feeling uncomfortable about that, or finding that there are some things in that public speaking that you really enjoy. And I think that practice of starting small, there are opportunities in the Open School chapter, there are opportunities in other small groups within your learning environment and in work environments, where you can begin to practice that self-confidence of saying your truth. Again, Dr. Mate had lots to say about the importance of speaking up on values. And that can be the door through which you gain confidence. You're often afraid of what you would never do to anyone else, and other people don't do. You're afraid of monsters in your head, not of the reality. So paying attention to people who, oh my God, they actually listened to me. They actually heard what I had to say. They asked me a question. How cool is that? Those are the small steps.
All right, thank you. Those are great steps. So I guess that concludes everything. So thank you so much again, Caroline, for being here. And just a reminder to the audience that there will be a QI project presentation at 3 p.m. The link is in the chat box right now. I guess I'll stop the recording for now. And if there's anyone who wants to stay by and chat, Caroline,
I'm happy to stay here. I'm happy to stay here in chat. And I'm also happy to correspond by email if anybody would like to be in touch with me anytime.
Mm-hmm. And your email was on that slide, which you had to take down, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. So it's carolyn.canfield@ubc.ca. Pretty obvious. Mm-hmm. You can Google me too.
I'll type it into the chat. But yeah, so thank you all for coming and joining us on the talk today. And thank you again, Caroline. And I guess for whoever wants to stay around, feel free, but to everyone else, we'll see you at the QI presentations at 3.
Thanks again. Thanks for your attention and very best luck.